Welcome back, my friends, to the Derate The Hate podcast. I am your host, Wilk Wilkinson, your blue-collar sage, calming outrage and helping to navigate a world divided by fog and those who would spread that fear, outrage, and grievance. Each week, I'm sharing stories from my path and using the power of conversation and collaboration with my many great guests. Together, we chart a course toward understanding, bridging divides, and fostering a community where wisdom prevails over discord. Friends, it really is about bettering the world one attitude at a time. We did not create the hate, but together we can derate the hate. The only good thing about a bad attitude is we have the ability as individuals to change it. For me, it starts with gratitude and personal accountability. I am so incredibly grateful that you have taken the time to join me for another powerful DTH episode. Please remember to subscribe and share the DTH podcast with your network of friends. If you would like to support the show, check out the Support Us page on the Derate The Hate website. With that, my friends, let's get to it. Now, we talk a lot on this show about bridging divides, about having tough conversations, especially with people we don't agree with. And one thing I've learned over the years, my friends, is that the way we show up in those conversations isn't all that different from how we show up in our most personal relationships. That's exactly why I was so excited to sit down with my friend and today's guest, Dr. Bruce Chalmer. Bruce has been working with couples for nearly 3 decades, and he brings a refreshing and sometimes revolutionary perspective to the table. He's the author of It's Not About Communication, Why Everything You Know About Couples Therapy is Wrong. And yes, that title says it all. Because as Bruce points out, many couples don't actually have a communication problem, they have an anxiety problem. And if we're being honest, that applies just as much to political conversations, online arguments, or even tense workplace debates as it does our romantic partnerships. In our conversation, Bruce breaks down how anxiety shuts us down. It keeps us from truly listening and pushes us into defensive, sometimes rigid ideologies. Whether we're fighting with a spouse or trying to navigate a tough conversation with somebody on the other side, he talks about the importance of tolerating discomfort, the courage it takes to truly connect, and the radical idea that intimacy, whether emotional or intellectual, can only happen when we're willing to admit we might not have all of the answers. Bruce also co-hosts a fantastic podcast with his wife Judy called Couples Therapy in 7 Words. And it was a real treat to be a guest on that show not long ago. On today's episode, we flip the script a bit and talk about how the same principles that help couples build deeper, more meaningful relationships can help all of us navigate disagreement with empathy, curiosity, and a whole lot more grace. Friends, this conversation is about more than marriage. It's about human connection and how being vulnerable and grounded in faith, not just religious faith, but faith in each other's humanity, can lead to more understanding, less fear, and stronger relationships across the board. So whether you're working on your marriage, trying to heal a divided relationship, or just looking to have a better conversation in a world that feels more divided than ever, this episode is for you. Here's that conversation with my friend, Dr. Bruce Chalmer. Here we go. Bruce Chalmer, thank you so much for joining me on the Derate The Hate podcast, my friend. So good to see you again.
It's great to see you again. We really enjoyed having you on our podcast, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, Bruce, a little while back, we had an opportunity to speak on you and Judy's podcast, the Couples Therapy in 7 Words podcast. And that was such a wonderful conversation. I so much enjoyed it. And then when we started talking and you told me about this ideas versus ideologies thing that you've done work in, and I thought, you know what, I got to get Bruce on the podcast, and it's just, like I said, just grateful to have you here, Bruce. So let's get into that a little bit. Well, before we do, let's talk a little bit. We'll go backwards a little bit just because we've already mentioned the fact that I was on your podcast with you and Judy. So you're a couples therapist, and you wrote a book a while back called It's not about communication,
Yeah.
about couples therapy.
Yeah.
But and what really intrigued me about that is because I'm one that's always saying it's all about communication. So let's start there.
Sure.
Tell
Yeah.
me about this title, Bruce. It's not about communication. Why everything you know about couples therapy is wrong.
Yeah. Is that a snarky title or what? And I'm not that snarky a person. I could be snarky, but that's not my usual way of presenting myself. I'll tell you why I say that. Of course, you're right that communication is important. What I've noted as a couples therapist, I've been doing this now for like 30 years, and I don't know what the percentage is, but it's like 80% or so, some number like that, of the couples that I meet in the first session. And I'm asking them my standard opening questions, and, they're telling me what they're there for one way or another. And they're almost always saying we need to communicate better. Every time we try and talk about anything, if it's at all, there are any differences or at all uncomfortable, we end up in a fight, or we end up in a deep freeze, or we end up in a fight followed by a deep freeze. It just doesn't work well. So can you give us tools to help us learn to communicate better? That's what they're after. Can you teach us, obviously we're not communicating well. Obviously we're not good at it. So we must need to learn some tools to communicate. That's what people ask for. And if you go and look at, all the self-help books out there and talk to zillions of therapists and stuff, what you'll find is lots and lots of people who are perfectly willing to teach all sorts of really neat techniques on how to have conversations. So nothing wrong with any of those techniques. In fact, when we get into that notion of ideas versus ideologies, I'll come back around to that. It's like, there's a lot of good ideas out there. And you've heard of some of them, the notion of like nonviolent communication. You've heard of that. Perhaps it's a very well-known, developed, thing. I statements as opposed to you statements, active listening. Those are all really, good ideas, because what they are is what a well-functioning couple does when they're getting along well. If they're talking about something, if you were a fly on the wall watching them, or, if you were John Gottman taping them, years ago, that's what he used to do, then you would observe them pretty much following those rules. You would see they're not calling each other names. They're speaking generally with respect, even if they disagree. They're often making sure they do understand each other, which indicates they're actually listening. They're doing all those things. That's great. So if you want a couple to function well, then all you have to do is teach them to do those things, right? Wrong. That is,
You're not at the root cause at that point. You're just masking the problem.
Exactly.
I get
Yes,
it.
it is that I will bring out my inner nerd. I'm like a recovering nerd with frequent relapses. That is the post hoc ergo propter hoc fallacy, which is to say that is, after, therefore, because of fallacy. Just because people who function well do those things doesn't mean teaching people to do those things will make them function well. They are doing those things because they function well. They're not functioning well because they do those things.
That is okay. Hold on.
Yeah.
That is hugely important, and I want you to repeat it and slow it down a little bit for the backbenchers. That that is one of the most important statements that anybody can actually make, because unlike the statement "fake it till you make it," or all those other things, those cliche things that you hear, that is one of the most important things that somebody could actually hear. Because the opposite is completely ignoring the root cause of the problem and just trying to come up with something based on what the root cause actually isn't. So say that again for me, Bruce.
I will, and I can expand on it a little. I mean, that the phenomenon of people, learning all those good ideas. I'm not knocking the ideas. Those are good ideas about, active listening and I statements and nonviolent communication, all that stuff. The phenomenon of people learning that and then still being awful to each other is very real. You see people doing it. Often what they'll get in arguments about when they've learned those techniques is they'll say, well, you're not doing it right. They'll argue with each other then about how they're not doing it right, and they still won't be hearing each other. Or if they are hearing each other, that's the other irony about this. When you learn those techniques, if you're a well-functioning couple, using those techniques is ridiculous. It's cumbersome. It's absurd. You're you're getting along wonderfully with your wife and you want to make love. And do you really want to have a conversation where you say, well, gee, what I think I hear you saying is that you're interested in making love right now. Do I understand you correctly? That's not usually how it goes when it's going well, right? So it's not that it's wrong to do those things. It's just that it's sort of silly. And the other thing is when you're freaking out, you won't remember how to do it. You won't implement it. So all of those rules and techniques are great, except when you actually need them. Because when you actually need them, you won't be able to follow them. And when you don't actually need them, they're ridiculous. So that's another way of explaining that notion that indeed. So here's another way of summing it up that I love to point out. The vast majority of folks that I meet do not have difficulty communicating. They are very accurately communicating some really nasty stuff. The problem isn't how they communicate. The problem is what they're communicating. They're communicating anger. They're communicating mistrust. They're communicating contempt. They're communicating, just general lack of faith. All of those things can be really painful and damaging and hurtful, but it's not because they're not skilled. They're very skilled at communicating those things. That's how they feel, and it's coming out very clearly. Now, there's a few interesting little exceptions to that. Occasionally I'll meet somebody where one or both of members of the couple are somewhere on the autistic spectrum, and kind of by definition, often. Yeah, and it's a spectrum, it's a very broad spectrum, but often what that implies is they're not good at reading the other person's emotions. Well, that causes communications problems. Fair enough.
Or they don't have their own emotional filter. They just don't have the ability to regulate their own emotions in that particular circumstance, whatever that circumstance.
Yes, often that, and often not being able to read the other person's.
That's right.
So if you can't tell if your wife is happy or pissed off, it makes for communication problems.
Makes it darn difficult.
Yeah, it is hard. And those folks, and that's not an illness really. It's just a way of being, a style.
Yeah.
But those folks can learn some skills, and they are in fact communication skills. And and then occasionally, every once in a while, I'll meet a couple where they literally do not speak the same language, or at least not very well. If they're talking to me, of course, at least one of them speaks English, but maybe the other one doesn't speak English very well and they have actual communication issues or cultural differences. The same action can have a different meaning in different cultures. Those are communications issues. They're
Absolutely.
interesting.
Yeah.
But the vast majority of folks I work with, yes, there's always differences, but the vast majority of folks are very skilled at communicating. The problem is what they are communicating. And if what they're communicating is, as I kind of gave that list earlier. And with respect to the work you do, the amazing work you are doing, I think this applies way more broadly than just to couples, which is why I think it can make sense for me to be on this podcast, because that same phenomenon happens when you're talking about trying to talk across the political spectrum. If people are freaking out, they're not going to be able to follow rules very well.
Right.
The big skill needed, and this, I'm so in admiration of the work you do in, Braver Angels, all, that concept of getting people together to speak when they have such large, real, serious differences in important things. They're going to feel anxiety. The key there is to be able to tolerate the anxiety without freaking out.
Yes.
And that's the same thing in a couple. The key to intimacy is to be able to tolerate the anxiety of, I want to say something to my partner and I don't know how he or she's going to respond. And if I actually want to maintain an intimate connection, I'm going to have to risk that. And that's about tolerating anxiety.
Right. That's such a hugely important point, Bruce, because a lot of times when I think about anxiety, and I have such great empathy for all those that suffer from anxiety, because anybody who's experienced anxiety knows that it's one of the worst things that you can actually experience, because especially, you have a person who's got a perfectly high functional brain and they're doing all these wonderful things and they think they're in control of themselves or what they're doing or what they're thinking or whatever. And anxiety is just like this cloud that will overtake you. Now, thankfully, I'm not somebody who suffers a lot from anxiety, but I've talked to a lot of people who have anxiety disorders and And now all of a sudden you just get this strong feeling of being out of control, not being able to control yourself, not being able to control your emotions, not being able to control what you think. You can't feel, you don't feel like yourself. You don't, these things are horrible. And more than that, going to what you were talking about the work that I do with Braver Angels and the Pro Human Foundation, and trying to bridge divides in these spaces where people have these great differences. When people's anxiety starts to take over, not only do they lose control of themselves, their ears slam shut. Slam shut, and they no longer are able to receive the message from the person that they're speaking with. And the worst thing that you can do when you're trying to bridge divides is sit there with somebody and not be able to receive their message. Primarily because the other person sees quickly that you are not receiving their message, and then their anxiety grows, their anger grows, their animosity for even being in the situation grows. And now nothing is happening. Nothing good is happening. So talk a little bit more about that, Bruce, and how somebody can we talked about this being a root cause issue as opposed to a true communication issue. Sometimes it's just a communication issue, but a lot of times it's the root cause is not the communication. It's the message or the way the message is being conveyed. And then the anxiety of the person who's trying to convey the message or the person who's trying to receive it. Talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, well, indeed, everything you're describing about the effects of anxiety. And of course, I think we have to recognize anxiety is a necessary function. It is designed by, however you want to say it, by evolution, by God, or some combination thereof, to cause us to, forget everything else and deal with whatever it is that is causing the anxiety, or what we think is causing the anxiety. So indeed, when the anxiety happens, and they show this, they've done studies with functional MRI scanners, you get somebody freaked out enough, and it's amazing that people who volunteer to go in one of these things and get freaked out. But what happens is whole chunks of neocortex shut down. It basically goes offline. So they can't hear, indeed, as you said, they can't hear what somebody's saying. And that indeed has that cyclical or that sort of vicious cycle effect of rising anxiety in the other person. And then you've got nothing. So how does one get past that? Well, when I talk about tolerate the anxiety, that's what I tend to, the way I like to think about it is, and I see this a lot, and I'll bet you do in the work that you do as well. When you actually get people who can manage, even in the presence of that anxiety, to stay this side of freak out, enough so they still can hear each other. And they're feeling maybe they're feeling the discomfort of having some of their precious ideas challenged, but they're doing it in a sense where they're sensing the other person wants to hear them too. In other words, intimacy, that sense of connection. Uh-huh. That's where growth happens. When people are intimately connected, and of course, I'm not just referring to sex here, I'm referring to, intimate conversation, all kinds of emotional connection, even intellectual connection. When people can connect that way, they become a joint mind. They're thinking thoughts neither one of them would have thought by themselves. In our conversation, neither one of us would be thinking the same thoughts if we didn't, if we weren't talking with each other right now. We're creating something that is new. And maybe I'll segue into my little bit about ideas and ideologies.
Oh, yeah.
Ideas.
Sure.
And I'm using the terms maybe a little bit idiosyncratically. I don't know. It's funny. My son, Seth, and I mentioned this to you before you started recording. I'll put in a plug for my son, Seth Chalmer. I didn't realize until after we had interviewed you on our podcast, and we happened to be visiting Seth. He lives down in New Jersey, and we happened to be visiting him, Judy and I, my wife, Judy Alexander, and I. And I said, oh yeah, we had this really neat interview with Wilk Wilkinson. He said, Wilk Wilkinson, he knows who you are because he is one of the ambassadors, and I guess the first cohort of ambassadors in the Pro Human Foundation that you are, of course, Beautiful. A part of.
Beautiful.
So anyway, there's that. Seth has actually been a bit critical of my use of ideas versus ideologies. So I have to say that just to put in a plug for Seth, maybe you can have him on sometime and he can be critical of his dad's ideas about ideas and ideologies. He just says, well, everybody has ideologies. They're not all bad. And the way I use the term is like idea is good, ideology is bad. He points out it's not that simple, and he's right, of course. But I will continue. Ideas are that which open you up. When you're having a conversation with someone and you're saying what you think and you're listening to what the other person's thinking, those often lead to ideas. As I just said, if you're having an intimate conversation, ideas pop up you wouldn't have thought of before. That's generative. It's growth. One of my favorite metaphors is when I talk about a plant, a couple needs both stability and intimacy. And so does a plant. If the seed gets planted, the roots provide stability, but intimacy is the energy for growth. That's where growth happens. And couples crave that just like plants need it. A plant's going to try and crack the sidewalk if it gets paved over. Well, couples do the same thing. They try and crack the sidewalk. So ideas are the things that open you up. Ideas might make you uncomfortable, but if you can avoid freaking out, you're left. When I hear an idea that challenges my own precious ideas, I'll be thinking, ooh. It's like, wow.
Brings out a whole range of things within you. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Ideologies are when ideas harden so that instead of the idea, letting your brain sort of and your mind run free, it's about shutting down so you have to defend the ideology. And that is the very opposite of listening to someone else.
That's exactly right.
And what I always love to point out is when ideas harden into ideologies, they become caricatures. You can have good ideas and harden them into an ideology and it becomes a caricature. And one of my favorite examples, I am religiously involved, as is my son Seth. We're Jewish. And so I'm not knocking religion per se. I'm not, one of those folks that says, oh, religion is the source of all evil. I don't mean that. But if you look at all the religions I know of, I'm no expert, but all the religions I've heard of, Western, Eastern, whatever, they all seem to have this bit about saying that you should be good to people. And the religions that are theistic religions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, they all are saying God is good and God wants people to be good to other people. Those are, in my humble opinion, good ideas.
Yes.
Harden them into ideology and you get the wonderful, not, occurrence of religious war. People killing other people because they don't love God the right way. Or they don't use the right terminology.
Your ideas don't fully comport with mine, so now we've got to eliminate you as a whatever, right?
Well, as a threat to the ideology.
As a threat to my ideology.
Yes.
Yeah. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. No, and I want to kind of circle back to something because that is hugely important. But when we think about ideas versus ideologies, and ideologies becoming a caricature of a particular idea, the importance of ideas and new ideas and being open to new ideas can't be overstated, in my opinion.
Yeah.
There's a book called Think Again by Adam Grant, I believe. Adam Grant. The book's called Think Again, and quite often, even before I'd read that book, I've heard the idea of if you are never open to new ideas, if you won't at least listen to with an open mind to different things, you're never going to be able to course correct when your idea is wrong.
Yeah.
So being able to think again, even though you can have a firmly held idea, but if you become an ideologue and be stuck in your own ideology without the ability to even think twice about, maybe I am wrong. Maybe I looked at this the wrong way. Maybe there is something I'm missing here. If you're not able to do that, you put yourself in a horrible position. I often say I write it on a lot of my notebooks because I still write a lot of notes. I never see them again, but I write a lot of notes for whatever reason, right? And I've got a lot of notebooks laying all over the place. And on the front of those, I write, every mistake is an opportunity for learning.
Absolutely.
Oftentimes, people who aren't willing to think again, aren't willing to open up their mind to new ideas, don't believe that they actually make mistakes. They don't learn from their mistakes. That's a huge problem. Now, when I tie this in my mind, Bruce, to the idea of a conversation is not just me talking to you. And a conversation is not just you talking to me. This is me and you speaking with each other and opening up a common space.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm just here to espouse my ideas to you and not listen to what you say, I'm not creating a common space. I'm still stuck in my own bubble.
Yeah. Yeah. That becomes a dead space.
Yes.
And that's really, I suppose I could define my notion of ideas exactly that way. Ideas are when it's actually when the space is open, because that way you're letting your mind take in what the other person is saying, and it is changing you, or at least it is potentially changing you. And I suppose I should put in a word. It's funny when I said that Seth, my son, says, hey, ideologies aren't all bad. I want to put in a word for maybe what he's referring to. I don't want to speak for him, but I'm not opposed to tradition at all. I'm a quite a traditional person myself. I'm not opposed to the humility that comes from letting yourself be guided by tradition. And in fact, I wrote about this in one of my other books, actually. If the people who think that they needn't be bound by any tradition, whatever, are dangerous folks.
Yes.
And that, those ideas become very dangerous ideas because they think they're not, there's no humility there. There's no sense of intellectual or emotional humility where you say, I could be wrong. It's like you were saying about, think again. That there are, and I'm not remembering the buzzwords for this, but there are organizations that make a point whenever they're going to propose something of assigning a group of people to be the naysayers and say, okay, you got to poke holes in this. And organizations that don't do something like that, organizations where it's all just yes people, often succumb to making ridiculous mistakes that if they would have some people that would not be yes people, they would have figured out.
No, that's absolutely right. One of the greatest bosses that I've ever had over my career, Bruce, said, I can't remember if he said it in my interview or he said it in, one of the first weeks that I worked for him. But he said, if you do nothing but agree with me every time I say something, one of us is not necessary, and it's going to be you. So
Yep.
I don't need just a yes person. I want somebody who's able to think for themselves. And if you think that I'm wrong, I want you to speak up about it, because that gives me an opportunity to learn, or it might give me the opportunity to think at it or come at it from an angle that I probably hadn't thought of before.
But yeah, there's a famous story in Talmud about that, actually, about these two rabbis who were very, very close, and they had this horrible falling out, and one of them died. And so the students of the rabbi was very sad, and he especially sad because they'd never been able to repair the relationship, before the other rabbi died. So they sent him one of their brightest upcoming students. And whenever the rabbi would say something or give some opinion, the student would come up with, 30 different citations from scripture that supported his point of view. And the rabbi that the master rabbi was incensed by this. And he said, I don't need 30 opinions telling me that I'm right. I already think I'm right. When I was talking with, the rabbi who died, he used to give me 30 reasons why I'm wrong. That was useful.
I don't just need a walking manifestation of confirmation bias to follow me around all the time. That's not what I need. Unfortunately, that's one of the things that so many people fall into right now, Bruce, is they get an idea in their head and they become incapable of trying to find ways that their idea was wrong. They'll jump online. They'll say, okay, this is what I think about this. This is what I think about this. And this is what I think about this. Now show me everything that agrees with what I think.
And the algorithms, they're of course designed to do exactly that.
They'll do it.
Yeah.
That confirmation bias is one of the biggest enemies we have to being able to think again, to being able to step outside of our own ideology and say, is what I'm thinking actually correct? Or is there a valid explanation for why I might be wrong? And then what we do is we look at these other people and say, you know what? I am 100% certain that I am right. And this person either is dumb or they're lying.
Yes.
They're dumb, they're lying, or they're evil.
Or they're evil. Exactly. Those are the ones. Yep.
So then, taking this back full circle to what we were talking about earlier, Bruce, is when we're having these conversations and now all of a sudden we're trying to create a common space to get something accomplished. but we can't even recognize the root cause of our problem. We can be the greatest communicators in the world. We can use all those beautiful communication techniques that I talk about all the time. But if we're not willing to, or even, I say that I got to change gears slightly, but on the same thought. If we are not in any way capable of accepting the idea that we might be wrong, if we allow our certainty to block off any possibility that that other person might have the right point of view, we are going to keep ourselves trapped in our own bubble. And then our anxiety will continue to build because we are not going to hear what that other person is saying. By not hearing what that other person is saying, I'll go to a phrase that my friend Monica Guzman from Braver Angels says, those who are underrepresented in our lives will be overrepresented in our minds and our imaginations.
Yes.
Because as we do not listen to that person, our ignorance for them or of them grows. And with that ignorance creates our fear, because that which we don't know, we begin to fear more. That hardens the walls of our silo. Our silo will then, while we're in our silo, we allow our imagination to continue to build greater anxiety for that which we don't know. And our ears become more and more closed. So you used the phrase earlier, Bruce, vicious cycle. It is an absolutely vicious cycle.
Yeah.
The only way we can actually communicate with people that whether we don't like them, we don't know them, we don't want to know them, whatever, the only way we are able to effectively communicate with those folks is to step inside our own. We got to step outside of ourselves a little bit and say, we might be wrong.
That's the key. Actually, let me, if I may, address the snarky subtitle of that book we mentioned, right? Because the title was, it's not about communication. Well, we've already kind of demolished that one, which is to say, well, of course it is about communication, but it's not about communication techniques. That's at least in couples therapy. And the subtitle was, Why Everything You Know About Couples Therapy is Wrong. Now, spoiler alert, late in that book, I point out, incidentally, that little phrase applies to me. Everything I know, air quotes for those who are just listening, everything I know about couples therapy is wrong too. And it is exactly what you're referring to. What I'm saying is, if I think I know, I'm part of the problem. And that in a couples therapy situation, you're probably doing harm, not good as a therapist, if you think you know, as opposed to saying, I think I've got some good ideas. Don't know if they'll apply well to you or not, but let's give it a shot. And that's a very different approach. And when you do that, again, that's ideas instead of ideologies. So people coming and it comes up in a therapeutic situation where one of the spouses, let's say if I'm working with spouses, one of them has read a book, like one of mine or something, it's not usually that bad when it's one of mine, because I can sit there and say, well, don't believe everything that guy says, but
I question that guy a little bit.
Yeah, you gotta be careful with that guy.
Take that with a grain of salt.
But they, they'll have read something, and again, probably good ideas, but that's now they've got everything diagnosed. Diagnoses are interesting because, like everything else, they are useful in the ways they're useful, and they can also be straitjackets. They can be, in other words, if people start applying them ideologically, it's the same issue. One of the things I point out to almost every couple I see in the first session, and I almost always say it this way, roughly 20 minutes in, I usually say, okay, now that we've been doing this for 20 minutes and we're old buddies, I can already tell something about both of you. Neither one of you is nuts. And they usually smile, because they don't need me to tell them. I hope they don't need me to tell them that. There have been the occasional exception, and I don't mean to make fun of serious mental health issues, right? There have been the occasional exception where I haven't said that because somebody seems to be showing signs of psychosis, or they're having a manic episode or something. But the vast majority of folks I work with, I say that saying, I know you already knew that, but that's the basis. It's what you were saying earlier about, what happens in that silo. So when you get ideological, the people who disagree with you, I think about three possibilities. They're either crazy, or they're stupid, or they're evil, or some combination of those. Yeah. And if you start with the assumption that they're none of the above, which I think is the place to start from unless seriously proven otherwise. You start with the assumption that basically people are valid to be who they are, which means they're not crazy, they're not stupid, they're not evil, they're human beings, Start
All
with that
human stand.
assumption. It can't be true that all those people on the other side, whatever side you're on, are crazy or stupid or evil. It just can't be true.
Oh,
Maybe there's a subset, but it ain't true.
well, there's going to be some in every crowd,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
it's not all of them.
And that, that I sum up that attitude that says we're all starting out valid in one word. I call that faith. That's what I mean by faith. That basically we're valid to be who we are, even when we screw up, which we all do. I don't know what your language code is here, so I've been trying to be sort of peachy here. So,
Yeah.
but
No.
okay.
That's I do appreciate it. I try to keep it good, but I am so I can relate so much to what you're saying, and we mentioned the Pro Human Foundation, of which I'm a member of the board of advisors. It's a beautiful organization, but that pro human stance. We are all valid human beings. We're all valid human beings with a lot of the same wants, needs, and desires. And if we start from a baseline of we're all human beings that have a lot in common. We've got much more in common than than what separates us. That is a baseline for which to start that conversation. Understanding that this person is probably not or they could be wrong, but they're probably not crazy, stupid, or evil. They may work into that category, or they are, like you said, some combination thereof. That's fine. But start with the baseline that we're all human beings. We all have much more in common than what separates us, and let's work from there.
I mean, to observe, it's Daryl Davis, right? He's the
One of the
guy who
founding
was
members
one of the
of
founding
the Pro
members.
Human Foundation. Good
To
friend of mine.
to do what he did, I don't know him, you know him, it's awesome. I mean, it leaves me in awe. I can't
Absolutely
imagine
awesome.
having the courage to do what he did. And for folks who are hearing this, and most of your listeners probably do know, but
DTH listeners will know who Daryl Davis is. But yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
yeah. Well, he went to Klan rallies. He's a black man, went to Klan rallies and struck up conversations with people. And of course, he didn't do it by going and shaming and yelling. And, he went by treating people like people and actually having conversations. And I don't know, what's the number now? He has a collection of hoods that people have sent him.
Yeah. He's just first line people. It's been well over 200 people that he's walked out of, whether it be the Klan or neo-Nazis, things like that. Different white, kind of white supremacist type people or people within hate groups. But you think about the ripple effect of that. You think about what that has done, what that approach has done to stifle and walk back, the white supremacist movements or just hate groups in general. It's just absolutely incredible. I mean, the man is a real life superhero, and one of the greatest honors of my life is actually knowing him, having been able to have several conversations with him. People, maybe you're listening to this podcast for the first time, you can go back. He's been on the podcast a number of times, starting way back in, I think, episode 99. The guy's a real life superhero. But yeah, that's the footing. Walking in and saying, we're two human beings. Let's have a conversation. Let's see where it goes.
Mm-hmm.
And those unlikely conversations have turned into absolutely incredible and monumental steps for humanity.
Yeah.
Just beautiful.
And I'm inspired by that, of course, just as a human being, but I'm also inspired as a therapist, as a couples therapist, because when I'm working with couples, and of course, it doesn't take the courage that he showed to, I'm not walking into Klan rallies as a Jew, but nevertheless, the courage that a couple can show to confront their own, you could call them demons or whatever. I mean, they're not necessarily demons, but to be able to, as I keep saying, tolerate the anxiety of actually hearing each other, trying to step away from whatever narrative they've got going of why they are right and why their partner is just being so crazy, evil, or stupid. And to actually start to hear each other, it's really inspiring. And the stakes for that couple are very high, and it doesn't always turn out, happy ending, like, oh, they love each other and they stay together. Often they love each other, but they split up. They realize, wow, no wonder we're having this problem. There are some serious differences here that we can't bridge. We can respect each other. We can still be parents of the same kids, but we can't continue to live together. And that's it's a tragedy of a kind. But when they can do that with love, then
it's a tragedy that's part of being a human being. We are all fallible human beings. We all make mistakes. There's no human being on earth right now that I'm aware of. If somebody can find one, go ahead and show me. But that hasn't made some type of mistake. And we're fallible in the sense that we all make mistakes. We can all learn from our mistakes, and we can come together in a better way after that. But not all couples are meant to be couples. Not all people are going to blend well. But you know what? Just because we don't blend well doesn't make the other evil, dumb, or some kind of crazy. So we need to remember that. We all need to acknowledge that. We all need to acknowledge that sometimes it's not about changing people's minds. It's about opening people's minds. And if we go into our conversations with an open mind, we're going to come out the other side a lot better than we started. Bruce Chalmer, this has been an incredible conversation. The time went way too fast. I look forward to more in the future. We definitely got more opportunity for things to talk about. I do hope you'll come back and tell the DTH listeners where can they find out the most about you, and then obviously we'll put that information in the show notes as well.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's been an honor to be on your show. They can find me at brucechalmer.com. That's the best place you can find links there. If you want to go direct to our podcast, Couples Therapy in 7 Words, our podcast website is CTN7, the number 7, CTN7.com for Couples Therapy in 7 Words. And if you go to you can also get my books anywhere books are sold, basically. So you can just, if you search for, I'm known, my author name is Dr. Bruce Chalmer. So if you search for that on Amazon, you'll find my list of books there.
Dr. Bruce Chalmer, thank you so much for joining me on the Derate The Hate podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Friends, if there's anything in this episode that provided exceptional value to you, please make sure to hit that share button. Share it with your friends, share it far and wide. And of course, if you haven't done so already, be sure to subscribe right from our website so you can get the Derate The Hate podcast sent to your email inbox every week. So this is Wilk wrapping up for the week saying get out there, be kind to one another, be grateful for everything that you've got, and remember it's up to you to make each and every day the day that you want it to be. If there is something that you would like to share with me, you can catch me on most social media platforms, or you can email me directly, wilk@wilksworld.com. With that, my friends, I am going to back on out of here, and we will catch you next week. Take care.